At the restaurant, my son said, "We can't afford to keep supporting you, Mom." His wife laughed. Everyone stared. I calmly pulled out my bank statement and slid it across the table. He looked at it, went pale, and whispered, "This can't be real." But it was, and what happened next left them both speechless. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The text arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, while my hands were occupied with a recalcitrant silver clasp. The chime, a soft digital note, was an intrusion in the quiet of my apartment. I wiped the polish from my fingers with a cloth before picking up the phone. The screen glowed with a message from Marcus. "Mom, we need to talk about your future. Dinner at the Silver Vine, 7 p.m. Our treat." I read it 3 times. The words were arranged with a careful corporate formality that was not my son's natural way of speaking. "We need to talk about your future." It was the kind of phrase used before a termination or a difficult medical diagnosis. Our treat. That was the part that sealed the dread, turning it from a vague unease into a cold, solid weight in my stomach. An invitation to a place like the Silver Vine was not a kindness, it was a statement. It was a venue chosen for a performance. I placed the phone back on the workbench, next to the half-finished necklace. The silence of the room became audible. I looked around. At the shelves of accounting textbooks I could not bring myself to donate, at the comfortable armchair by the window, at the neat rows of tools on my bench. This was my future. It was quiet, it was secure, and it was, apparently, a subject of concern. My response was brief. "I'll be there." I did not use a smiley face. I set the phone down and returned to the clasp, my movements slower, more deliberate. The text had shifted the axis of my day. I thought of the last time I was at their house, 2 weeks prior. Chloe had picked up my phone from the coffee table, a simple model, several years old. "Oh, Ellie," she had said, with a laugh that did not reach her eyes. "This thing is a dinosaur." "Marcus, we should get your mom one of those new ones with the big screen, for safety." She said it as though I were a child who might wander off. Marcus had nodded along, not meeting my gaze. I had said nothing, only taken the phone back and slipped it into my purse. Its weight had felt familiar and sure. I finished the clasp and set the necklace on the velvet display board. It was a clean, modern design, one of my better sellers online under the discreet brand name I maintained. The proceeds were direct deposited into an account Marcus knew nothing about. He had never asked. The afternoon light began to fade. I moved from my workroom to my bedroom. The choice of outfit was a tactical decision, not a social one. I selected a charcoal wool trousers and a cream silk blouse, both old, both of exquisite quality purchased in a different lifetime on a rare splurge. I fastened my pearls, a single strand my own mother had left me. I studied my reflection. A poised black woman with silver-gray hair, dressed with what I knew was quiet, unassailable elegance. I looked like myself. That was the point. At 6:15, I called Arthur Henderson. He answered on the second ring. "Ellie, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I have a dinner with Marcus and Chloe," I said, my voice even. "At the Silver Vine." A pause traveled down the line. Arthur was a retired financial advisor who had become a friend at my local cafe. He had a knack for hearing the numbers behind the words. "The Silver Vine," he repeated. "An announcement venue, not a conversation venue." That is my assessment. And the topic. "My future," I said, the words tasting of metal. He was silent for a moment. I could hear the faint rustle of a newspaper. "You have your documents." "Always." "Good." Another pause. "Remember, Eleanor, the balance sheet does not lie. People do. Sometimes they lie to themselves most of all." "I remember." "Call me after, regardless of the hour." I assured him I would and ended the call. His words were a comfort. They affirmed that I was not imagining the subtext, that my decades of reading columns of numbers had also trained me to read the columns of human behavior. The sum was rarely a surprise if you understood the underlying assets and liabilities. I collected my coat and my purse. In the inner zippered compartment of the purse lay a single, folded piece of paper. I did not need to take it out to see it. The numbers were printed in my mind as clearly as on the page. I checked for my keys, my phone, the folded statement. All present. The drive to the restaurant was a study in controlled anticipation. I replayed the text. We need to talk about your future. It positioned me as a problem to be solved, a liability to be managed. I considered the phrasing of their offer to pay. It was not generosity, it was a demonstration of capacity. They were showing they could afford the setting, thereby underscoring the burden they perceived me to be. It was a clumsy, transparent power play, the kind I had seen in boardrooms when junior executives tried to assert dominance. I parked my reliable, well-maintained sedan between a gleaming SUV and a sports car. The silver vine rose before me, a low-slung building of dark wood and frosted glass. Soft light glowed from within. I could see the silhouettes of diners behind the windows, the flutter of servers' movements. I took a slow breath, the cool evening air filling my lungs. This was the gilded cage they had constructed for this conversation. A beautiful, expensive place to deliver an ugly, small-minded verdict. They believed they were summoning me to define my limits. They did not consider that I had already defined my own, years ago, and that their walls could not contain me. I walked toward the entrance, my posture straight, my pace steady. The hostess, a young woman in a black dress, greeted me with a professional smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Beaumont," I said. "My son and his wife are already here." Her eyes flickered with recognition and a trace of something else, perhaps pity. "Of course, right this way." She led me through the hushed dining room. The air smelled of roasted meat, expensive wine, and lemon-scented polish. The murmur of conversation was low, the clink of cutlery precise. I saw them before they saw me. Marcus, looking handsome and tense in a navy blazer. Chloe, radiant and sharp in a stylish dress, her eyes already scanning the room, calculating impressions. They were seated at a prime table, a vase of white orchids between them like a centerpiece at a negotiation. Marcus looked up. His smile was tight and effort. Chloe was whiter, more practiced. I felt the weight of the paper in my bag. I felt the deeper weight of 30 years of silence, of work done in the shadows, of a security built not for spectacle but for survival. The hostess stopped at their table. "Your guest, Mr. Beaumont." "Mom," Marcus said, standing up too quickly. "You made it." I offered my own small, careful smile. "Of course, you invited me." I took the empty seat they had left for me, placing my purse on my lap. The cage door clicked shut. The performance was about to begin, and I, who had always worked behind the scenes, was finally ready for my role. The chair was heavy and smooth under me. I placed my purse on the empty space of linen tablecloth to my right, a deliberate barrier. Chloe's perfume, something floral and expensive, reached me across the orchids. "You look nice, Ellie," Chloe said. Her eyes performed a swift, appraising scan of my outfit. I saw the moment she categorized the garments as not new, but acceptable. It was a look I had come to know well. "Thank you, Chloe. This is a beautiful restaurant." I kept my voice neutral, a simple statement of fact. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the table, then seemed to think better of it and sat back. "We thought it would be a nice treat, a real sit-down, no distractions." He attempted a smile. "A treat," I repeated. "How thoughtful." A waiter materialized, presenting menus bound in leather. We ordered drinks, a Pinot Noir for them, sparkling water with lime for me. The silence that followed was filled by the restaurant's ambient sounds. The low hum of a refrigeration unit, the distant laugh from another table, the precise scrape of a knife against china. Chloe took the lead, as I knew she would. "So, how have you been, Ellie? Really?" She framed it as concern. "I've been well. My days are quite full." "That's good," Marcus said, a little too quickly. "Staying active is important." He said it as if prescribing medicine. The drinks arrived. Chloe took a sip of her wine and launched into the preamble. "Marcus and I were just talking the other day about how crazy everything has gotten. Inflation, interest rates, it's a different world." I nodded, waiting. "My car lease was up," Marcus jumped in, following the script. "Had to get into a new one. The payments, well, they're a stretch, but you need reliable transportation." "And the kitchen," Chloe sighed, a performative sound of exhaustion. "We finally bit the bullet and started the renovation. The quotes were astronomical. We had to scale back the cabinetry just to keep it within reason. I listened. This was the establishing of their liabilities. They were building their case, line by line. I took a small sip of my water, the lime sharp on my tongue. "It's just a lot of pressure," Marcus said, his eyes on his wine glass. "Trying to keep everything afloat. Planning for the future, for kids eventually. College funds. It requires realistic expectations." The phrase from the text had landed. Realistic expectations. It sat on the table between us now, next to the bread basket. "I understand planning," I said. My tone was mild. Chloe leaned in slightly. "Of course you do, and that's why we wanted to have this talk, to be realistic together." She glanced at Marcus, a prompt. He cleared his throat. The waiter returned to take our food orders. The interruption was brief but palpable. Marcus seemed to lose his thread. We ordered seafood for them, a simple salad for me. When the waiter left, the space felt smaller. Marcus took a larger drink of wine. "Mom, the thing is, we've been looking at our budget, really scrutinizing it. And with the new car, the house projects, the future plans," he paused, gathering the words they had undoubtedly practiced. "We're stretched, really stretched." I said nothing. I watched his face. I saw the anxiety in the tight line of his jaw, the avoidance in his eyes. He was not a cruel man. He was a nervous one, led here by his wife's calculations and his own shallow fears. Chloe placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of unified support. Her voice softened into a tone of compassionate difficulty. "What Marcus is trying to say, Ellie, is that we need to think about sustainable solutions, for everyone's sake." "Solutions to what?" I asked. I knew the answer. I needed to hear them say it. Marcus looked directly at me then, and in his gaze, I saw the little boy who used to believe I could fix anything. Now, he saw me as something to be fixed. "To your situation, Mom. We've been helping out, and we want to, we do. But it's not a long-term plan. We can't afford to keep supporting you like this." The words hung in the air. They were out. "We can't afford to keep supporting you." He said supporting as if he had been the one depositing checks into my account for years, rather than the occasional gift card at Christmas. Chloe nodded, her expression a masterpiece of pained sympathy. "It's just not feasible anymore. We have to be adults about this. Maybe there are programs, or you could look into a smaller place, something more manageable for your fixed income." The assumptions were breathtaking. They had built an entire narrative of my poverty, my dependency, without a single piece of financial data. They saw my quiet life, my old car, my simple phone, and they saw insufficiency. They did not see the choices behind them. A couple at the neighboring table had gone quiet. I saw the woman's eyes flick toward us, then quickly away. The clink of silverware around us seemed to dampen, as if the atmosphere had absorbed the shock of their statement. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. The dread from the text was gone, replaced by a still, certain focus. I looked at my son's face, now flushed with a mixture of relief and shame at having spoken the terrible thing aloud. I looked at Chloe's composed features, waiting for my reaction, expecting tears, perhaps, or pleas. I placed my hands flat on the tablecloth, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm in my chest. The performance had reached its climax. They waited for my lines. I looked at the white orchids, their delicate shapes stark against the dark wood. I thought of the folded paper in my purse, its numbers a stark, factual rebuttal to their fiction. The time for their rehearsal was over. Now we would work with the truth. The silence after Marcus's declaration was complete. It was not a peaceful silence, but a vacuum, swallowing the usual sounds of the restaurant. I could feel the attention from the nearby table, a palpable weight against my skin. Marcus looked down at his hands. Chloe's sympathetic mask held firm, waiting for my capitulation. I did not speak. Instead, I moved my right hand to my purse, which rested on the linen beside me. The clasp made a soft, definite click as I opened it. I reached inside, past my wallet and my keys. My fingers found the inner zipper, pulled it open, and closed around the single sheet of paper, folded neatly into thirds. The paper was crisp, heavyweight. I withdrew it and placed it on the tablecloth in front of me. The sound was a dry, slight rustle. Both of them looked at it. Chloe's eyebrows drew together in a faint line of confusion. Marcus's eyes flicked from the paper to my face, searching for an explanation. I did not provide one. With the tip of my index finger, I pushed the folded document across the smooth linen. It traveled the short distance past my unused salad fork, past the base of the vase of orchids, coming to a stop precisely between their two-place settings. "What's this?" Marcus asked, his voice still thick with the emotion of his own speech. "Open it," I said. My voice was quiet level. It held no anger, no tremor. It was the voice I used when reviewing a column of figures. He glanced at Chloe, then picked up the paper. His movements were slow, uncertain. He unfolded it carefully, the paper crackling in the quiet. He smoothed it flat on the table, his eyes scanning the top. I watched his face. I saw the moment his brain parsed the letterhead. It was from my primary investment bank, a name he would recognize. His gaze dropped to the lines of text, the numbers. His breath caught. It was a sharp, audible intake. The color began to drain from his face, starting at his forehead and receding downward, leaving a pale, waxy complexion. His lips parted slightly. He blinked, as if trying to clear his vision. "Marcus," Chloe's voice was a tense whisper. "What is it?" He did not answer her. He was reading the same line again, and again. His fingers, which held the edges of the paper, began to tremble, a fine, visible shake. The paper fluttered. "This," he started. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "This can't be real." The words were not an accusation toward me. They were a statement of sheer, overwhelmed disbelief. He was looking at the final line, the total assets figure. A number that represented 30 years of denial, of packed lunches, of second-hand furniture, of silent, relentless allocation. "What can't be real?" Chloe's patience snapped. She reached over and plucked the statement from his slackened grip. Her eyes, sharp and quick, scanned the page. Her process was faster than his. She understood the format immediately. She found the total. Her reaction was different. There was no slow draining of color. Instead, a hot, blotchy red flushed up her neck and into her cheeks. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. She looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The polished, composed woman from moments before was gone, replaced by someone grappling with a fundamental rewrite of reality. "What is this?" she finally managed, her voice higher, strained. She held the paper up as if it were a foreign object. "Ellie, what is this?" "It is my current bank and investment statement," I said. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "As of last Friday." "This number," Marcus whispered, staring at me now with naked shock. "This balance." "Is correct," I finished for him. "But how?" The word was a plea. He was not asking for financial methodology. He was asking how his narrative, the story he had built about his mother's need, could have been so catastrophically wrong. Chloe found her voice, and it was edged with a panic she tried to mask as skepticism. "This has to be a mistake. Or is this some kind of joke?" She looked around, as if expecting a hidden camera. "It is not a joke," I said. "There is no mistake. The account numbers are there. You may verify them if you wish." I said it calmly. The offer was genuine, and it underscored the fact of the document. Marcus was still stuck on the how. He shook his head, a slow, mechanical movement. "Your job, your house, you never said." "I never said anything," I agreed. "You never asked." The waiter chose that moment to approach, our plates balanced on his arm. He took in the scene, Marcus ashen and staring, Chloe rigid and flushed, me sitting perfectly still. He paused, his professional smile faltering. "Is everything all right?" he asked, hesitating to set the plates down. "Everything is fine," I said, turning to give him a small, polite nod. "You may serve the food." He did, placing the seared scallops before Marcus, the salmon before Chloe, my simple salad in front of me. The food looked incongruous, a parody of a normal meal. The waiter retreated quickly. Chloe ignored her plate. She stabbed a finger at the statement on the table. "You have this amount of money, and you let Marcus worry." Her tone was shifting from shock to a dawning defensive anger. "You let us talk about programs." I looked at her directly. You did not ask about my financial situation. You presented your conclusions. I am now presenting the data. Marcus found his voice again, but it was weak. All this time, Mom, you had this and you lived like that, in that same house, driving that car. His confusion was genuine. He could not reconcile the number with the life he thought he saw. The house is paid for, I said. It has been for 10 years. The car is reliable. My needs are met. I paused, letting the simplicity of the statements contrast with the complex shock on their faces. The money is not for display. It is for security. The words hung in the air, and I watched as the true meaning of their own intervention began to curdle in their stomachs. This had not been about my lack. It had been about their assumptions. Their perceived burden was a phantom. Their generous support was a fiction. The humiliation, which they had intended for me, was revering its course, settling over them with a tangible weight. I looked at my salad, but I had no appetite. The performance was over. The truth was on the table, clearer than any of the words they had spoken. I had nothing more to say to them in this place. Chloe's accusation hung between us, brittle and exposed. She had shifted from confusion to a defensive offense, a tactic I recognized. When presented with incontrovertible data, some people attack the source. I did not let you do anything, I said, my voice still measured. You formed a hypothesis based on incomplete information. I have now provided the complete data set. I used the clinical language deliberately. This was an audit, not a family quarrel. Marcus was staring at me as if seeing a stranger. The shock was hardening into something else, a dawning, awful comprehension. All those years, he said, his voice ragged. You worked 2 jobs, you went to school at night, you never bought anything new. He was piecing it together, the evidence that had always been there. Yes, I confirmed. And you saved it all, invested it. He gestured weakly at the statement. Not all, there were expenses, but a consistent percentage, yes. I studied, I learned. I made a plan when you were still in elementary school. I offered no dramatic details. The facts were sufficient. Chloe snatched up the statement again, as if a second look would change the numbers. This is insane. Where did it even come from? Your salary couldn't have. My salary was 1 stream, I interrupted, my tone permitting no further interruption. There were others, overtime, freelance bookkeeping in the early years. Later, the returns from cautious, long-term investments in index funds and dividend stocks. And for the past 7 years, income from a small online business. I did not elaborate on the jewelry. It was irrelevant to the core truth. A business, Marcus echoed, lost. A modest enterprise. It covers its costs and provides a discretionary income stream. The principle you see there, I nodded toward the paper in Chloe's hand, is the result of capital appreciation and compound interest over 3 decades. The rule of thumb is to live on less than you earn. I adhered to it. The simplicity of the formula seemed to infuriate Chloe. It was not magic. It was discipline. A discipline she and Marcus, with their leased cars and kitchen renovations, clearly found alien. So you're a secret millionaire, Chloe said, the word secret laced with venom. And you said nothing while we stressed about money, while we talked about helping you. I looked at her, then at Marcus. You never asked about my finances. You assumed a deficit. Your offer of help was based on that assumption. It was not an offer born of curiosity about my well-being, but a conclusion about my inadequacy. I let the statement settle. True support does not begin with a declaration of someone's burden. It begins with a question. Marcus flinched. He looked at his untouched scallops, then at his hands. The shame was settling in, deep and corrosive. He was remembering every offhand comment, every pitying look, every time he'd spoken to me about managing on a fixed income. He was realizing each had been an insult. Chloe was not ready for shame. She was grappling with the blown narrative. What were you even planning to do with it? She demanded, as if my capital were a hoard I was selfishly guarding. It is my security, I repeated. It is the answer to every, what if a single mother learns to fear in the dead of night? It is the reason no one will ever tell me they can't afford to keep supporting me. I quoted his words back to them, and they landed with the force of a physical blow. I looked at the table, the fine china, the sparkling glassware, the food growing cold. This was their stage, and my reveal had dismantled it. I had no more lines to deliver here. I opened my purse once more. From my wallet, I extracted two $50 bills. It was more than the cost of my salad and water, but I intended to cover my portion and a generous tip. I placed the bills on the tablecloth, weighting them down with the salt shaker so they wouldn't flutter away. I picked up my purse and stood. The movement was smooth, unhurried. Both of them looked up at me, Marcus with devastated eyes, Chloe with a stunned scowl. "The question you came here to discuss," I said, looking down at them, "was the wrong one. It was never whether you could afford to support me. The question, which you now have the information to consider, is whether you deserve to be in my life." I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked away from the table. My back was straight, my steps even. I felt the gaze of the neighboring diners, but it was different now. No pity, a kind of wary, respectful curiosity. The waiter standing by the service station met my eyes. He gave a small, professional nod that held a trace of something more, an acknowledgement. He had seen the exchange, heard the tone. He saw a woman leaving with her dignity not just intact, but fortified. I did not look back. I walked through the hushed dining room, past the hostess stand, and out into the cool night air. The door closed behind me, muffling the world inside. The gilded cage was behind me. I took a deep breath. The air was clean, unperfumed by food or false concern. I walked to my car, the keys firm in my hand. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a profound, hollow clarity. A line had been drawn, not by me, but by them. I had merely illuminated it so they could finally see it. As I drove away from the silver vine, my phone remained silent in my purse. I knew the storm would come, but not tonight. Tonight, there was only the quiet hum of the engine and the solid, numerical truth that had finally been spoken. I had more than enough. I had always had more than enough. Their understanding of what constituted enough had simply been deficient. The drive home was quiet, but the silence in my own car was peaceful. It was a different silence from the one I had left behind at the table. I did not wonder what they were saying. I could imagine it well enough. I called Arthur Henderson when I reached my apartment, as I had promised. "It is done," I said when he answered. "The statement. Presented and received." He let out a slow breath, and the reaction. Shock, denial, defensiveness, the standard progression when a foundational assumption is proven false. I hung my coat in the closet, the familiar motions grounding. "Good," Arthur said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. It was not malicious. It was the satisfaction of a teacher whose pupil has executed a perfect maneuver. Now the real work begins for them, the reckoning. "Yes. Get some rest, Ellie. You've earned a quiet evening." I thanked him and ended the call. I made a cup of tea and sat in my armchair. I did not turn on the television. I listened to the quiet of my paid-for home. I thought not of their faces, but of my own past. The quiet evening was a luxury that had been earned over thousands of noisy, exhausting ones. Meanwhile, in the stylish, open-plan living room of their suburban home, the foundation was cracking. I learned the details later, from fragments Marcus would eventually share, and from the logical reconstruction of events. They had driven home from the restaurant in a thick, suffocating silence. Marcus had stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Chloe had scrolled through her phone with violent, swiping motions, not reading anything. Once inside, the dam broke. "I cannot believe her," Chloe said, throwing her purse onto the sleek, modern sofa. The sound was a dull thud against the leather. "I absolutely cannot believe the deception, all this time, playing the poor, struggling widow." Marcus walked to the kitchen island, resting his palms on the cold quartz. He did not look at her. "She wasn't playing anything, Chloe. We just never bothered to look." "Don't you dare defend her." Her voice was sharp, rising. "This was a setup, a deliberate humiliation. She sat there and let us make fools of ourselves." "We made fools of ourselves," Marcus said, his voice low and hollow. He was seeing it all now, replaying every interaction. The The Christmas when he'd given her a grocery store gift card with a pat on the shoulder. The times he'd offered to help with her budget. The sheer, condescending pity of it all. His stomach churned with shame. Chloe began to pace on the expensive area rug. What does this even mean? What was her plan? To hoard it all and then what? Watch us struggle while she sits on a gold mine. It's not a gold mine, it's her life's work, Marcus said, finally looking up. His face was pale, strained. She worked 2 jobs. She went to school at night. She never bought anything. She saved it. She invested it. It's not a trick. It's math. The simplicity of it was a brutal indictment of their own financial choices. Oh, don't give me that life's work sanctimony, Chloe snapped, stopping her packing to face him. She's your mother. A mother's job is to support her children, not to hide a secret fortune from them. She was reframing the narrative, casting my autonomy as a form of maternal neglect. Marcus shook his head, a slow, weary movement. Support us. Chloe, I'm 30 years old. We have a house, 2 cars, 2 incomes. When have we ever needed her financial support? We were offering her charity she didn't need because we assumed she was a charity case. The word charity tasted foul in his own mouth. We were being responsible. We were planning. And all the while she was what? Spying on us, judging us. Chloe's anger was spiraling, seeking a target. My revelation had not just wounded her pride. It had invalidated her entire worldview in which she was the benevolent superior. She wasn't judging. She was just living her life. We're the ones who judged. We judged her car, her house, her phone. We decided she was a burden. He put his head in his hands. My God, I said those words to her. We can't afford to keep supporting you. I actually said that. The reality of the scene in the restaurant was finally hitting him with its full force. The pitying looks from other diners, which he had thought were for his mother, had, after her exit, shifted. They had been for him, for the son who had so publicly misjudged and insulted his own parent. Chloe saw his distress and her tactics shifted. The anger cooled into a pragmatic, icy calculation. She walked over to him. Marcus, listen. However it happened, this is the situation now. That money, it changes things. It has to. She's your only family. Surely she'd want to help secure your future. Our future. He lifted his head and looked at her. He saw the avarice flickering behind the practical concern. It was a look he had perhaps seen before but had chosen to ignore. You want her money. I want what's fair, she insisted, her voice climbing again. After all we've done, after all we were prepared to do, there's an expectation, an obligation. There is no obligation, Marcus said, the words leaving him with a strange finality. We established that tonight. We declared we had no obligation to support her. She has shown she has no need of it. So where does that leave any obligation from her to us? The logic was circular and devastating. Chloe stared at him, her mouth a tight line. The unity they had presented at the restaurant, the united front of concerned adulthood, was fissuring under the pressure of truth. They were not on the same side of this revelation. He was drowning in guilt. She was scheming for damage control and advantage. He pushed away from the island. I need to think. I'm going to bed. We're not finished talking about this, Chloe called after him, but her voice lacked its earlier force. He walked down the hall to their bedroom, but he did not enter. He stood before a framed photo on the wall. It was from his graduation, the 3 of us. I was in a simple dress, smiling, my arm around him. He looked at my face in the photograph, the face of a woman who had just put a son through college while secretly building a fortress of security. He had seen only the simple dress. He had never seen the fortress. He did not go into the bedroom. He turned and went into the spare room, closing the door softly behind him. The crack in their foundation was not just verbal. It was physical now, a space of silence and separate rooms. The expensive house felt hollow, a shell that echoed with the words he wished he could take back. The burden he had tried to assign to me had settled squarely on his own shoulders, and it was far heavier than he ever imagined. He sat in the dark of the spare room, and I sat in the quiet light of my living room, but we were both in the same place, the past. His was a past he had just discovered was false. Mine was a past that had built the truth he could not comprehend. That night, after the restaurant, the memories were not vague recollections. They were sharp, specific, and present. They were the foundation under the number on that statement. It began not with a grand plan, but with a cold knot of fear. Marcus was 4. His father had been gone for 6 months, the child's support sporadic and then non-existent. I was working as a receptionist at a dental clinic during the day and stocking shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. The math was simple and brutal. Income, minus rent, minus utilities, minus food, minus childcare, equaled a number so close to 0 it felt like a precipice. Our apartment was a small, boxy space in a building that hummed with the lives of other struggling people. The furniture was a collection of hand-me-downs and curb finds I had cleaned and repaired. But it was clean. It was our shelter. One night after putting Marcus to bed in his small room, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and my calculator. The numbers would not change. I had reached the end of a paycheck with a week to go until the next. I had a jar of change for milk and bread. The fear was not an emotion. It was a physical presence, a constriction in my chest. I looked at the closed door to Marcus's room. I could not fall. He depended on me not to fall. That was the night the principle was born. It was not a philosophy. It was a survival tactic. My security will never be someone else's responsibility. I wrote it on a scrap of paper and taped it inside my cupboard door. It was a vow. The first step was information. I enrolled in night classes at the community college for accounting. It was the most practical thing I could think of. Numbers were orderly. They could be mastered. I arranged a childcare swap with a single mother down the hall, Rita. I watched her son on my 2 free weeknights. She watched Marcus on the nights I had class. My days were a logistical puzzle. Up at 6, make breakfast, pack lunches, drop Marcus at the subsidized daycare. Work 9 hours at the clinic, smiling through fatigue. Pick up Marcus, make dinner. On class nights, I would take him to Rita's, his small backpack holding his pajamas. I would sit in a classroom smelling of chalk and old coffee, fighting to keep my eyes open, writing notes in margins of my textbook. On work nights, I would take him to the grocery store, where the manager, a kind older man named Frank, would let him sit in the break room with coloring books while I filled shelves until midnight. Marcus would often fall asleep on a pallet of empty cardboard boxes, and I would carry him to the car, his head heavy on my shoulder. The budget was sacrosanct. Every dollar was assigned a task. I learned to mend clothes. I learned which vegetables were cheapest per pound. Entertainment was the library park. I did not buy new shoes until the soles had holes. I did not buy a coffee from a shop. The money saved from these denials, small amounts that felt meaningless at the time, were placed into a savings account. $5, $10, it was a ritual. When I got my first slightly better job as a bookkeeper's assistant, the first thing I did, after adjusting the budget for our slightly improved groceries, was to open a brokerage account with $50. I read books from the library on investing. I learned about compound interest. It sounded like a quiet magic. I started with a single share of a reliable company, then another. The social cost was high, but I was not in a position to afford society. Friends from my old life drifted away. My family was distant. I was too tired for parties, too poor for restaurants. The loneliness was a constant, low-grade ache, but I had Marcus, and I had the plan. The plan was my other child, nurtured in silence. When I earned my associate's degree, there was no party. I went home, put the certificate in a drawer, and started applying for better jobs. I got one, junior accountant. The increase in salary did not trigger an increase in lifestyle. It triggered an increase in the automatic transfer to my investment account. The percentage was fixed, 20% of net income always. The years passed in a blur of routine. Work, childcare, study for my CPA, sleep when possible. Marcus grew. He needed things, school trips, sports equipment, later college applications. Each was a line item, budgeted for, often requiring adjustments elsewhere. The money for his college fund came from my freelance work on weekends, not from my core savings. The principle held, our present needs were met from current income. The savings and investments were for the future, for the fear I refused to ever feel again. I paid off the small, cautious mortgage on our little house when Marcus was in high school. The sense of ownership was not pride, but relief. It was a fortress wall completed. By the time Marcus left for college, the quiet machinery I had built was running on its own momentum. The investments had grown. The habits were bone deep. I had reached a position of seniority at a good firm. The online jewelry business began as a hobby, a way to use my hands for something beautiful instead of balancing columns. It became another stream, modest but consistent. I never spoke of it. To speak of it would have been to violate the principle. Security was not for display. It was for knowing, in the quiet of your own mind, that the floor beneath you was solid and of your own making. I assumed Marcus understood, on some level, that we were secure. I did not realize he had mistaken the simple floor for a sign of poverty, and my silence for a lack of anything to say. Sitting in my chair that night after the silver vine, I saw the entire 30-year ledger. The credits, the hours, the denials, the disciplined allocations, the debits, the loneliness, the fatigue, the missed social moments, the misunderstanding of my own son. The final balance was not just the number on the statement. It was the woman sitting in the chair, a woman who had built a fortress to keep fear out, only to discover the gate had been locked from the inside, keeping her son from seeing who she really was. The revenge was not in the number. The revenge was in the story behind it, a story he had never bothered to read. Now he had the first page. The rest of the ledger was mine. 3 days after the dinner at the Silver Vine, my doorbell rang. I was at my workbench, but I had been expecting this. I had not heard from Marcus or Chloe. The silence was its own form of communication. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing on my porch, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He looked like he had not slept. I unlocked the door and opened it. He flinched slightly, as if expecting a different reception. "Mom," he said. His voice was rough. "Marcus, come in." He stepped inside, his eyes darting around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. He noted the bookshelves, the comfortable furniture, the quality of the afternoon light through the clean windows. He saw the workbench in the alcove, the tools arranged in neat rows. "Can I get you some tea?" I asked, moving toward the kitchen. "Yeah, sure, thanks." I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. I took down 2 cups and saucers from the cupboard. They were part of a bone china set I had bought for myself a decade ago, a reward for a professional milestone. The pattern was simple, a thin band of platinum around the rim. They were delicate, expensive, and I used them every day. I placed them on the kitchen island where he stood. He watched my movements, the precise ritual. He said nothing until the tea was steeping and we had moved to the living room. I sat in my armchair. He sat on the sofa, perched on the edge, holding his cup and saucer awkwardly. "I don't know where to start," he began, staring into his tea. "Start wherever you need to," I said. I took a sip from my cup. The warmth was comforting. He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry for what I said at the restaurant. It was wrong. It was cruel." The words sounded rehearsed, but the emotion behind them was raw and genuine. "It was," I agreed calmly. "But the words were only the conclusion. The process that led to them is what concerns me." He looked up confused. "The process?" "The assumption, Marcus. The years of assuming my life was a problem for you to solve. The belief that my choices were signs of lack, not signs of choice." I kept my voice even. This was not an accusation, it was an analysis. He put the cup down on the saucer with a sharp click. "How was I supposed to know? You never told me anything. You never talked about money, about your plans. You just lived like this." He gestured around the room, but his gesture encompassed my entire life. The modest car, the functional clothes, the quiet routine. "I did not hide anything," I said. "I lived within my means. I prioritized security over display. These are not secrets. They are values. You interpreted those values as poverty." "But you had millions," he said, the number still strange on his tongue. "Millions, Mom, and you lived like a church mouse." There was a hint of the old frustration in his voice, the inability to reconcile the two facts. "I lived like a woman who knew the value of $1 because she had counted every one of them," I corrected him. "The money is not for spending on things. It is for peace of mind. It is the answer to the question, what if? You and Chloe seem to spend your money answering the question, what will people think? They are different equations." He flinched at Chloe's name. She's not handling this well." "I did not expect her to." He ran a hand over his face. She thinks you were deceptive. She thinks you set us up. I presented facts in response to a false claim. That is not a setup. It is a correction. I paused. Your wife's reaction is her own to manage. My concern is with you, with my son who looked at me and saw a burden. The word hung between us, the word he had used. His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back angrily. I never thought of you as a burden, not like that. I was worried. I thought you were struggling in silence like you used to when I was a kid. I thought I was stepping up, being the man of the family. I felt a pang then, deep and old. This was the core of it. He remembered the early struggles, the fatigue, the worry. He had internalized the role of protector, a role that had become obsolete but that he had clung to because it made him feel strong. In doing so, he had reduced me to the person I was 30 years ago. I appreciate that your intention may have come from a place of care, I said carefully. But the execution was condescending. You did not ask. You diagnosed. You and Chloe held a meeting about my future without consulting me. You presented your verdict in a public place. That is not care. That is a lack of respect. He was silent for a long time. The accusation of condescension hit its mark. I'm sorry, he said again, but this time it was softer, defeated. I feel like I don't know you at all. The you that built all that, I don't know that person. That person is me, I said. The same person who packed your lunches and helped with your homework. The discipline is the same. The goal was simply longer term. You were part of the goal, Marcus. Your security, your education was the first priority. My security was the second. They were not separate projects. He picked up his teacup again, his fingers tracing the platinum rim. He was noticing the quality now. This is nice china, he said, almost to himself. Thank you, I like beautiful things. I simply do not need to own many of them. I took another sip. The hurt is not about the money. It is about the fact that you and your wife assessed my entire life and found it wanting. You saw my independence as loneliness, my frugality as failure, my silence as ignorance. You decided I needed to be managed. That is what I cannot forgive easily. He nodded slowly, absorbing the distinction. The apology for the words was one thing. The apology for the worldview was something else entirely. What do I do? He asked, the question stripped bare. I cannot tell you that. You need to decide what kind of son you want to be to the mother I actually am, not the mother you imagined. And you need to decide what kind of man you want to be, separate from your wife's social anxieties. I placed my empty cup on the saucer. The tea is finished. I think you should go now. He looked startled, as if he expected the conversation to continue, for absolution to be granted. I stood up. He had no choice but to stand as well. I am not closing the door, I said, walking him to the entrance. But I am locking it until I see a key that fits. That key is not an apology. It is a change in understanding. He stood on the threshold, looking younger and more lost than he had in years. I'll try, Mom. I know you will. I closed the door. I listened to his footsteps on the walkway, then the sound of his car engine starting and fatting away. I returned to the living room and collected the teacups. I washed them carefully by hand, the warm water smooth over the fine china. The balance of the conversation felt correct. I had stated my account. The ball was in his court. The emotional ledger was now open, and he had just seen the first entry on the debit side, respect. It was a debt that could not be repaid with words alone. After Marcus left, the silence in my apartment felt different. It was not the silence of absence, but the silence of a settled truth. The air had been cleared of the old, false narrative. What remained was the structure of my actual life, which was far from empty. I decided it was time to inhabit that structure fully, in view of those who already understood it. I called Arthur Henderson. I'm having a few friends over for dinner on Saturday, I told him. I would like you to come. I would be honored, he said. The usual suspects. The usual suspects. The usual suspects were my found family. There was Geraldine from the community garden, a retired teacher with a pragmatic warmth. Ben and Louis from my long-defunct investment club, now just friends who enjoyed good food and intelligent conversation. And Arthur, my mentor and confidant. Saturday evening, I cooked. I made a roasted chicken with herbs from Geraldine's garden plot, a gratin of potatoes, a simple salad. The food was wholesome, plentiful, made with care but without fuss. I set my dining table with the good china, the simple linen napkins I had bought on a trip years ago. I lit a few candles. The room looked warm, inviting, alive. The doorbell rang at 6:30. It was Geraldine, holding a basket of bread still warm from her oven. "Ellie, your home always feels so peaceful," she said, giving me a brief, firm hug. Ben and Louis arrived next, bringing a bottle of wine they had chosen to pair with the chicken. Finally, Arthur arrived, carrying a small box of artisan chocolates. "For the hostess," he said, his eyes crinkling. We settled in the living room with drinks. The conversation flowed easily. Geraldine talked about a problematic rhubarb plant. Ben and Louis described their recent trip to see the fall foliage. Arthur shared a tidbit about municipal bonds that led to a lively, informed discussion about public infrastructure. I listened, I contributed, I laughed. The sound was not loud, but it was genuine. It filled the spaces of my home with a comfortable energy. We moved to the table. The food was passed, compliments were given and accepted without demurral. We talked about books, about local politics, about the challenges of growing tomatoes in a shady plot. There was no performance. No one was trying to impress anyone else. The respect in the room was implicit, earned through shared interests and consistent kindness. "Ellie, that necklace is stunning," Geraldine said, pointing to the piece I wore, a new design of intertwined silver strands. "One of yours?" "Yes, I was experimenting with a new weaving technique." "It's magnificent. You have such a gift," Ben said. "It's a practiced skill," I corrected gently. "But thank you." Arthur smiled at me from across the table. He understood the difference between a gift and a skill. One was bestowed, the other was built. This table was a testament to things built, friendships, security, a life of purpose. It was during dessert, a simple apple tart, that a soft knock came at the front door. The conversation paused. I had not been expecting anyone else. I excused myself and went to answer it. I opened the door to find Marcus standing there. He was holding a bottle of wine, an offering. His eyes were tired but clearer than they had been days before. He opened his mouth to speak, but his gaze traveled past me into the heart of my home. He saw the dining table, illuminated by candlelight, surrounded by smiling faces. He saw the empty wine glasses, the plates with remnants of dessert, the easy posture of my guests. He heard the tail end of Louis's laugh, a rich, unself-conscious sound. The scene froze him. His expression shifted from tentative expectation to a slow, dawning shock. This was not the image he held of my life, the quiet, lonely mother waiting for his call. This was a vibrant, social gathering. These were people whose body language spoke of familiarity and affection for me. He was an outsider looking in on a world he never knew existed. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I'm sorry, I didn't know you had company." "I'm having dinner with friends," I said, stating the obvious. I did not step aside to invite him in. That was a boundary he had not yet earned the right to cross. He nodded, swallowing hard. He thrust the bottle of wine toward me. I wanted to bring this, to I don't know." I took the bottle. "Thank you." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled by the warm murmur of conversation from my dining room. Geraldine asked Arthur a question about the chocolate. Everyone was politely ignoring the door, giving me privacy, but their very presence was a statement. "It looks like a nice party," Marcus said finally, his eyes still fixed on the scene behind me. "It is. These are good people." He met my eyes then, and I saw the realization hit him with full force. His mother had a community. She had a social life filled with laughter and respect. She was not pinning for his attention. She was living a full life without him. The intervention at the Silver Vine had not been about saving a helpless woman. It had been an intrusion into a life that was already complete. "I should let you get back to your guests," he said, taking a step backward. "Yes, it was kind of you to stop by." He turned and walked down the path to his car. I watched him go, then closed the door. I returned the bottle of wine to the kitchen counter and rejoined my friends at the table. "Everything all right, Ellie?" Arthur asked, his tone neutral. "Everything is fine," I said, taking my seat. I picked up my fork. Just a delivery. The conversation resumed, flowing around me once more. The warmth of the room enveloped me. This was my life. It was not a performance for my son's benefit. It was simply true. His unannounced visit had served its purpose better than any planned confrontation could have. He had seen the evidence firsthand. The balance sheet of my social and emotional assets was now as clear to him as the financial one had been. Both were robust. Both were built without his knowledge or assistance. He had come offering a bottle of wine, a token, and had left with the much heavier knowledge that he was not, and never had been, the sole curator of my happiness. Chloe's text came 4 days after Marcus's visit to my dinner party. It was brief and devoid of her usual performative flair. "Ellie, can we talk? Just us. Somewhere neutral." I considered ignoring it. The silence had been instructive, but Arthur's words echoed in my mind. "The reckoning is theirs, but you control the venue." I replied with a time and the location of a park bench near the community garden. It was a public place, but one that belonged to my world, not hers. She was already there when I arrived, perched on the edge of the bench as if it were dirty. She wore large sunglasses and a stylish trench coat, but her posture was rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I sat down, leaving a foot of space between us. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice tight. She did not remove her sunglasses. "You asked to talk." She nodded, swallowing visibly. "I owe you an apology for the dinner, for my assumptions." The words sounded rehearsed, pulled from a script on corporate etiquette. "Which assumptions specifically?" I asked. I wanted her to articulate them. She shifted, uncomfortable. "That you were in financial difficulty, that we needed to intervene. It was out of line." The apology was for the tactical error, not the moral failing. "It was," I agreed. "But an assumption is a cognitive mistake. The condescension, however, was a character choice. You did not merely miscalculate. You looked down on me." The bluntness made her flinch. Her composure cracked slightly. "That's not fair. I was concerned. We both were." "Your concern manifested as a plan to manage my life without my consent, to suggest I move to a smaller place, to research programs for me. That is not concern. That is a verdict of incompetence." I kept my gaze on the path ahead, where an elderly man was walking his dog. She took off her sunglasses then, revealing eyes that were red-rimmed and anxious. The polished veneer was gone, replaced by a raw, frayed nervousness. "What was I supposed to think? You never shared anything. You live like a nun. How were we to know?" "You were supposed to ask," I said, turning to look at her directly. "You were supposed to see a woman who raised a son alone, put him through college, owns her home, and lives peacefully, and think, she has managed her affairs. Instead, you saw only what you wanted to see: a project, a social liability." The term social liability hit its mark. Her cheeks flushed. "Marcus is devastated," she said, changing tactics, appealing to my maternal instinct. "He's guilt-ridden. He's talking about going to therapy. Our marriage is strained." I am aware Marcus is struggling. His struggle is with the consequences of his own actions and judgments. I cannot fix that for him, nor can you use his pain as leverage with me. She looked away, her jaw working. The pleasantries were exhausted. "What do you want, Ellie?" she asked, her voice hushed and desperate. "What will it take to make this right?" The phrasing was telling. It was a transaction. "It is not a matter of making it right. You cannot undo the revealed truth of your character. What it can be is a matter of establishing new terms, should you wish to have any relationship with me moving forward." She turned back, hope and wariness in her eyes. "What terms?" "First, you will relinquish any and all notions of having insight into or authority over my financial, residential, or personal life. You will not offer unsolicited advice. You will not make assumptions about my needs. You will treat me as a capable adult peer, not a ward." She nodded quickly. "Fine, of course." "Second, any future interactions will be based on mutual interest and respect, not on familial obligation. If you cannot find genuine interest or respect, then silence is preferable to pretense. I have a full life without obligatory Sunday dinners." Her nod was slower this time. "Okay." "Third, you will cease any speculation or discussion about my legacy. My estate plans are my own business. However, to be perfectly clear and to eliminate any motive for your attempted reconciliation, I will tell you that I am in the process of revising my will. The majority of my assets will be directed to established charitable foundations focusing on financial literacy for single mothers and support for elderly women in need of housing security. These are causes I understand. The color drained from her face completely. This was the financial core of her anxiety laid bare. The unspoken expectation of an inheritance, perhaps the underlying driver for much of her concern, was being formally extinguished. "You're cutting him out," she whispered. "I am directing my resources toward purposes that align with my values and my life's experience. Marcus is a grown man with a strong income. He does not need my money. He needed my respect, which he forfeited. The charities will use the money to give others the tools to build their own security, something I believe in deeply." She was silent for a long minute, absorbing the finality of it. The safety net she had imagined for their own over-leveraged future was gone. "That's your choice," she finally said, the words hollow. "It is. These are my terms. They are non-negotiable. If you and Marcus can interact with me within these boundaries, a cordial relationship may be possible. If not, then we will have a distant but civil acquaintance. The drama of the restaurant will not be repeated." She put her sunglasses back on, a shield against the world and against me. "He's your son," she said, a last, weak attempt at emotional blackmail. "He is, and I am his mother. That relationship is now defined by the truth, not by fantasy. You can explain the terms to him, or I will. It makes no difference to me." I stood up from the bench. The meeting was over. "Goodbye, Chloe. I trust you can find your way back to your car." I walked away, leaving her sitting alone on the bench in the autumn sun. I did not look back. The new terms were set. The power dynamic was permanently, unequivocally shifted. The revenge was not in the sting of the words, but in the absolute clarity they provided. There would be no more confusion, no more assumptions. The lines were drawn in indelible ink. She could choose to stay within them, or she could choose to stay away. Either way, my peace was secured. The gilded cage they had built was now occupied only by their own disappointments. I was free of it. The autumn after the park bench meeting with Chloe turned to winter, and winter gave way to a tentative spring. The terms I had set stood firm. There were no more unannounced visits, no more texts about my future. The silence from their direction was, for the first time, respectful. It was the silence of a boundary acknowledged. My own life did not stand still. The revelation at the restaurant, while painful, had functioned as a kind of liberation. The energy I had once used to maintain a facade of harmless simplicity was now redirected. I expanded my jewelry business, not for the money, but for the challenge. I developed a small online course teaching basic silversmithing, with the proceeds earmarked for a specific purpose. That purpose became the financial literacy workshops. I partnered with a local women's shelter and a community center. Using a clear, practical curriculum I developed myself, I began teaching other women, young mothers, older women starting over, the principles I had lived by. How to track every dollar. How to distinguish between wants and needs. The power of a small, automated savings plan. The basics of low-cost index fund investing. I called it Building Your Own Floor. The first workshop had 6 attendees. Word spread. The spring session had 20. Arthur helped me establish a proper fund, separating the workshop proceeds from my personal finances. "This is your legacy in action, Ellie," he said, approvingly. It felt more meaningful than any number on a statement. Marcus, I learned through brief, careful emails, had followed through on his mention of therapy. He did not share details, and I did not ask. The emails were factual updates about his work, never about Chloe, never about money. He signed them Love, Marcus. I replied in kind, with similar neutrality. It was a new language we were learning, stripped of assumption. He asked, via email, if I would meet him for coffee. I suggested a cafe near my apartment, one I frequented. He agreed. I arrived first. I chose a table by the window and ordered a tea. I wore a new necklace of my own design, a complex weave of silver that caught the light. It was a statement, but only to myself. He arrived 5 minutes later, looking less haunted than the last time I had seen him. He carried himself with less brittleness. "Mom," he said, sitting down, "thanks for meeting me." "Of course." He went to the counter and ordered a coffee. I watched as he pulled out his wallet and paid with cash. He returned to the table. "How are the workshops going?" he asked. He had read about them in one of my emails. "Well, the women are eager to learn. It is satisfying work." He nodded, stirring his coffee, though he had added nothing to it. "I'm glad." A pause. "I'm still in therapy. It's hard, but good." "I am glad it is helpful." Another silence, but it was not the loaded silence of the restaurant. It was the silence of two people relearning how to be in the same space without scripts. "Chloe and we're in counseling too. Together. It's a process." "I see." I offered no opinion. It was his process. He took a breath. "I wanted to say, I understand your terms, all of them, including about your will. It's your money. You should do what you think is right with it." The words sounded earned, not recited. He had fought his way to that conclusion. "Thank you for saying that." "I'm trying to learn," he said, looking at me directly. "To see people as they are, not as what I need them to be for my own ego, starting with you." He glanced down. "I saw you at that dinner with your friends. You were happy. You are happy. I never let myself see that before because it didn't fit the story I was telling myself about being the successful son rescuing his mom." "The story was unnecessary," I said. "I never needed rescuing. I only ever wanted your respect." "I know that now." He sipped his coffee. "It's going to take me a while to rebuild this." He gestured between us. "It will take as long as it takes. There is no deadline." He managed a small, real smile. "I'm on a budget now, a real one. No more leasing cars I can't really afford. Chloe's adapting." The admission was stark and honest. "A budget is a tool for freedom," I said, "not a punishment." "That's what my therapist says." He looked out the window for a moment. Would you ever consider having dinner? Not at the Silver Vine, somewhere simple, just us." "Perhaps," I said, "when the time feels right to both of us." He accepted this. He did not push. That in itself was progress. We finished our drinks with talk of innocuous things, the unseasonably warm spring weather, a movie he had seen. It was stilted, but it was an attempt. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "Can I give you a hug?" I nodded. He stepped forward and embraced me. It was not the clingy, guilt-ridden hug I might have expected months ago. It was the careful hug of someone who knows the value of what they are holding and is afraid of breaking it. I returned it briefly, then stepped back. "I'll email you," he said. "I'll look forward to it." I watched him walk away down the street. He did not look back. I gathered my things and left money for my tea on the table. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the spring sun was warm on my face. The revenge was complete. It had not been an act of cruelty, but an act of revelation. I had revealed my true financial standing, my true independence, my true social wealth. The consequence was not their punishment, but their education, and my own liberation. I walked home, the sun glinting off the silver at my throat. I thought not of Marcus, nor of Chloe, nor of the past. I thought of the next workshop, of the women who would attend, of the simple, powerful numbers I would write on the whiteboard. I thought of the quiet order of my apartment, my workbench, my books. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. In the hallway mirror, I caught my own reflection. A woman with silver hair, a composed face, eyes that held a hard-won peace. I smiled, not for anyone else, but for the woman in the glass. The balance sheet of my life was in order. The assets of respect, security, and purpose far outweighed the liabilities of past hurt. The interest earned was this quiet contentment. It was enough. It was more than enough.